welcome whoever is out there watching this little presentation. Although knowing what's coming, I think presentation, the word presentation may be a bit lofty. So we'll just continue with our plan and see how it goes. I hope the audience joins in when they're asked, even though this is a video record and it'll have no meaning to us. So anyway, I'd like to introduce the participants, starting with, in alphabetical order, Emanuel Rego, who's, at least in my screen, to my left. Emmanuel, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. Emmanuel is works at Nelvana. He's really our compositing expert, but he throws himself into many different projects, and then we get him to composite it all at the end, and everything looks beautiful, no matter how many mistakes we made along the way. Secondly, we have Scott Williamson. Scott,
hi.
You well today?
I'm spectacular, thank you.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. I would have expected nothing less. Scott is our technical lead on the 2D production side. More than a technical lead, he's a production facilitator and a monitor and manager on that side of the fence, and helps us all get the shows done on the 2D side. And today we're going to do something a little, well, maybe not different because we've never done it before, but I would consider it to be different. Lately, Nelvana has been exploring different methods of augmenting their 2D production. And one of the things that we wanted to tackle was the ins and outs of camera moves, creating more space and realities, I suppose, upping the production value of our 2D productions. But in this particular case, we're going to talk about camera. I think how we should start is really to start talking about, well, camera moves in general, perhaps, but most specifically, how camera moves and the types of camera moves that we do on the 2D side of the fence is limited by the fact that we're in 2D. So, Scott, maybe you can talk a little bit about the typical types of camera moves we do in 2D production, 2D animated production.
Yeah, so we would normally be able, without issue, to do a truck in or a pan, both left, right, up, down for all those. And a rotate Z is fine. Where things start to get hairy is if you want to rotate in the Y axis or the X axis. We can do.
We do get away with a little bit of that, right?
Yeah, you can do some cheats and some fakes to kind of make it feel good, but you can't do a 90-degree type of rotate. You could maybe do like a 10. There is a way to draw a perspective drawing that allows you to do a full rotate, but it's a warped perspective, so it looks different than what we're talking about.
And is it hard for an artist to arrive at the image that will make sense when you start rotating a camera through it?
Meaning when you're drawing that warped perspective?
Yeah.
It's just a different mindset because you're doing multiple points of perspective, so you're arcing everything to different places as opposed to drawing straight lines. It's more of an arc that's going to different vanishing points, and then that creates this warped look.
Right. So the vanishing point is actually moving as you rotate.
What it is you end up with a pan with multiple vanishing points, and when you pan it across, it looks like you're rotating the camera.
Right. And I suppose there's the additional challenge of points of contact, mostly between objects and the ground plane. Regardless of, and the issues with that persist even in the limited camera moves that you just described, right?
Yeah, so if we were to do something where we had a ground plane and a chair sitting on it, the four legs of the chair are all in perspective, drawn, but as soon as you start moving the camera, the rear leg should be moving at a different rate than the foreground leg, which is different than the ground itself. So the background leg starts to slide across the ground.
Yeah. And is this, I mean, there are tools, of course, out there, software tools that allow one to put multi-planes of images at various virtual distances from the virtual camera in the software package of your choice, but they don't really resolve the issue, do they? I mean, that technique, in fact, you know, points out the issue more than anything. And that isn't that because the ground plane, which is being depicted as advancing towards the camera and covering that space between the camera and, say, the distant wall, is actually all at the same place in Z as the distant wall. And therefore, if you did have a chair closer in Z, you end up allowing that chair to slide across, say, the hardwood slats, whatever's depicted in the art of the ground plane.
Right. And there are software that allow you to rotate a ground plane and have a piece of 2D art that's a flat ground plane, but you still have the same issue because the chair is still just a card and its back leg is still on the same plane as its foreground leg.
Yeah, you're in fact referring to the more detailed issue of the fact that the objects being depicted have depth, and therefore if they have points of contact at different points of depth, then you know you're never going to really get away with it, right?
Right.
Okay, so maybe we should show some examples. Okay, Scott, you had an example of something. I see you've whipped up in a matter of seconds. So let's see what you have in mind here.
My amazing drawing prowess.
It looks like a chair to me.
Yeah, this is just the idea of a chair sitting on wooden plank type ground. If we slide the camera, we can see that the back legs are moving across it much faster than the foreground legs. It's not quite in the exact depth spot, so the foreground legs are still sliding somewhat, but the background legs are sliding way across because the chair is effectively all on the same plane. If we look at
right.
that.
And that plane is somewhere between the front legs and the back legs, right?
That's right. So,
and also, this is an example where the ground plane has actually been rotated down, so it is in fact on the ground, so to speak, and reaching out towards the camera.
Right. I've very loosely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Really quickly set that up so we can illustrate it, but yeah. And that's
okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's a very good example. So that was a great example of extending the flat artwork out towards the camera. In effect, introducing, I guess, 3D geometry, sort of, but 3D geometry, which really is just a plane with a picture on it, depicting the floor. Do you have other examples of sort of the nuances of how we've integrated 2D and 3D in the past, or introduced 3D-ness to 2D projects?
Yeah, so we've taken that same idea and kind of expanded upon it, where we have multiple planes that have been rotated. So we have a ground plane, we have walls. This roof is actually 6 different planes to give a bit of an arc to it. There's a back wall, and then there's also all these pieces moving through the set that have been placed in depth. And everything has been more purposefully drawn for this purpose. So we have the wheels. I mean, it's a bit of a rough layout, but the wheels are more in line with the rail, so that as we move through, things should stay lined up. And we can see that as we push through, the camera move holds up much better. Things aren't sliding as much. We can get away with much more.
And I suppose, I apologize, perhaps the herky-jerkiness of the playback is as a result of the Zoom record. We're not sponsored by Zoom, and therefore I feel I can criticize the platform. But in any case, it certainly illustrates the point. Now, see the pickers or the cranes with the handles and I guess they're things to pick stuff up with. Are they properly placed in Z2, those drawings? Those are just flat drawings that are appropriately placed in Z, right?
That's right, yes. Now with this, so we have contemplated replacing those drawings with actual 3D models.
Yeah, right. So that's a project in our future. I'm wondering if we might have some more examples from our past. So this is something actually out of our past, right, Scott? The show being Bubble Guppies, something that Nelvana did with Nickelodeon. So tell us about what's going on here.
So this show was one of our early attempts at doing a hybrid show where we had 2D and 3D together. We had 3D characters, and we found that the best solution for that was to we had stand-ins, but everything was through rendered images. And so we would render out the 3D and then just import the images into 2D. This particular shot has the two 3D characters, which in a subsequent shot we'll see more close up. But we also, in this shot, used the rotated ground plane and then placed these trees in depth. So although it's short, you can see everything parallaxing properly. And if we let it play through, there'll be the close-up where we can see the 3D characters in with the 2D characters.
Right. So I guess in that case, in order to ensure that you've placed the trees, which are merely flat elements, at the right point in Z, you just have to make sure that they're touching the ground plane, that you've stretched out towards the camera, I suppose.
That's right. We looked for anchor points when we did it. Essentially, the shadows are part of the ground plane, so we use those for anchor points to know where to push it back to.
Right. But I guess what I'm getting at is, let's say that tree there that's in front of the truck, but behind it in Z, if that were actually not touching the ground plane and was up in the air, making it look like it was actually planted in the ground further back, that would not work.
Right. It would slide. Yeah.
It would slide. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we're going to move on to an experiment that we recently, well, almost completed, and we'll show you the completed product as far as it's advanced before the end of this presentation. But in this, I think what we wanted to establish was, or test and experiment with, was the integration of 2D characters within a 3D environment, which has a number of advantages and also challenges. Let me try to list some of them, and then Scott, you can show us how they present themselves. Amongst the advantages is that you can do a lot more with camera. Obviously, you have 3D environments. You can rotate the camera all you want. Now, where things get tricky is that the 2D elements that you're adding, in this case, two 2D characters, the boy and his dog, you have to be able to support that camera move with their animation, as well as even the rotation of those pieces of art so that they face camera. I want to point out one other advantage to this, and that is that in a typical 2D production, layout and background development is, one of the challenges of the show. And new ones introduced every single episode. We try to find efficiencies and reuse them as much as we can, but you can imagine that every time you have a different camera set up, even within an already established setting like a kitchen or what have you, every time you rotate that camera, you very likely have to go back and redo or derive a new background, potentially from existing artwork that you have. And if you push in on certain areas, you may find that your resolution no longer supports that, so you have to pump it up a little bit. Anyways, a lot of time and energy is spent creating backgrounds for 2D cartoons. Certainly when you have a 3D environment, you have the advantage that you can put the camera anywhere you want. So background development as an expense or a heavy expense kind of goes away. That doesn't mean that you don't have to invest up front in the modeling of those backgrounds. That certainly exists. And in any case, this is the test itself, the data set, so to speak, depicted in Harmony, Toon Boom's Harmony product. Scott, maybe you can show us what's going on here.
So as you mentioned, we have two 2D characters on a 3D set. Here we can see the expanse of the set. And if I scrub through a little, we can see in the camera view here what we have happening, which is a very wide camera move where we spin around the characters. And if we watch in the perspective view, we can see that these characters are just rotating to always face camera. And then the animators are having to counter animate within the camera view so that everything looks as it should as the camera move happens.
You know what I find fascinating when I see this is, and we'll show you the final product soon. Stay tuned. What's fascinating when I see this is that as the camera rotates around the characters, I see them as 3D characters. Like they almost look like toon shaded 3D characters. And I think that's a testament to the success that the animator had in depicting it. There are moments when there are probably detail that one might question in terms of whether it would really happen in 3D space. But just that, the face of the boy especially, like look at how the chin sticks out from the neck, and you notice it more when you see the chin rotating in front of the neck as you move the camera around. I think all of that really creates quite an illusion. Look at the brow and the eyes of the dog here as you're moving that camera around. To me, that looks like a 3D object, and it's amazing that an animator is capable of, I don't know, just maintaining that discipline of the object through that rotation to keep up that illusion. Now, one might ask at this point, why not just have 3D characters in there? Well, it's because there are certain advantages that 2D artwork presents, especially in animation, in extreme posing, in all kinds of things that you can do with a 2D piece of artwork that would be doable in 3D, but not without a lot of rigging effort or a lot of different versions of the character, et cetera, et cetera. And in any case, a lot of possibilities are opened up when you combine the two. I can also speak to the fact that the integration, and we're really only looking at GL shaded stuff here, but that the integration of the 3D set with the 2D characters is a challenge for the shader and, in fact, the modeler of the 3D environment. To fit in with these 2D characters, you know, the simplicity of their design and coloring, one has to make more simple the representation of those surfaces in the background, both in terms of their geometry, like there's not a lot of detail in the cragginess of the surface. There's no real attempt to make this look like a real rock cliff, and in the coloration of those surfaces. I know that we, for the sake of speed, as well as the ability to manipulate color in a much more manual way, we baked in a lot of the lighting cues right into the textures so that the renders come off fairly quickly. But in addition to that, we had to make certain decisions in terms of their shading, and this will come out when you see the final product, that allows for that background to, just live with the color space and the simplicity of the characters. Again, it's not perfect. It's still a work in progress, but it's something that we enjoyed working on it and are reasonably satisfied with the result. So we've been talking about the challenges of depicting 3D space with 2D elements and designs, and then the ability to move the camera with the full freedom of translation and rotation. And now we want to take a deeper dive on what can be unlocked during the composite process when you have these 3D elements mixed with the 2D elements. So Emanuel, maybe you can take us through what you've been doing with this shot.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay, so we have the Harmony renders now in a compositing package. And I'm going to just take you through the layers that we rendered. So we have our color layer, which is everything combined of 3D and 2D elements. But then we can now also have the alpha channel, which separates the 2D elements from the 3D elements, so that if there was a 3D rock in front of the characters, you would see that matted out. Okay. We also have IDs that we can use to isolate the characters from each other and from the background, so that if we want to add a special effect on one of them, we could, or make a slight adjustment. And we also have the 3D as a separate element as well. Now, 3D is interesting because if we take the 3D renders from the 3D package, we have access to more channels, okay? And this, what you're looking at here, is the depth channel. So this displays objects that are furthest away from camera as black and closest to camera as red here, as you can see, okay? And this channel will allow you to add special effects in that using the Z space, okay? Now, 3D also allows you to do a lot of other things. Like you can render out 3D passes so that when you get into a compositing package, I'll show you this scene here from one of our 3D shows, where you can actually adjust lighting by exposure to a particular light in the scene, okay? So you can you relight the whole thing. You can change the time of day. Show you here. So we have a, sorry, go ahead.
And this is adjustable at a level of granularity, like even down to what is being contributed by each light, right?
That's right. So if you have 3 lights in the scene, you can actually affect each light individually. So in this case here, you saw how I can actually add color to the scene and change the time of day completely. Okay. So that's the power you have when you have a 3D render coming from a 3D package that gives you all these individual elements. Okay. So what's really nice is now we can take this stuff and combine it with our 2D stuff that's coming from Harmony, and it just opens up a lot of extra possibilities in how we can manipulate things. Okay, so going back to this depth channel here, we can use this to create effects like depth of field and atmospheric perspective. So I can show you here, and I'll exaggerate these elements so that you can see it clearly. So atmospheric perspective, it just adds like a cooler atmosphere to objects in the far distance. And this just gives that illusion of depth, okay? And also, and it's what happens in real life when you look through a camera. Things that are further away do get more blue as far back, as they go bluer as they go further back, okay?
Yeah.
And then there's a depth of field. So depending on the lens you're using, you can, let me just exaggerate this too so you can see. So as objects are further back, they get softer, depending on how your depth of field is set in your camera, okay?
Yeah, and if we remember the original set, that cliff face is actually quite long compared to those characters, isn't it? It's actually quite a large space that we're looking at. So your exaggeration may not be such an exaggeration of what would be happening on this beach with a camera. And again, depends on the lens.
That's right. Right. And, you know, because it's all artificial, we can fake things, we can adjust things to aesthetics and just kind of take all that into consideration, right? So yeah, so now that's the power of having the both 3D elements and 2D elements together. We can control these things at the same time, potentially. Okay.
Right.
So, you know, one of the things to explore here is taking the 2D elements and moving it into that depth as well. So if you had a 2D character on that near that lighthouse, you would see it soft as well, and it being affected by atmospheric perspective as well.
Right.
Okay, so that's something to explore.
Okay, now the playback of this piece in its final form is going to be a little jerky, given the Zoom record that we're doing, but we will append the movie to the end of this presentation so that it will play out in its full smoothness. But maybe you want to take us through this playback right now and sort of point out, because you've added more than depth of field here. You've done stuff with the sun,
so
etc.
Let me show you this movie here in its complete composited form here. So, and let's see how good this will play back. I'll shrink it a bit here. So as the camera swings around here, we see a sunset. And there you go. So with this sunset, I've done some, I've remapped the color levels of the whole scene, including the 3D and 2D together. Also changed the exposure. So just to give the sense of like the camera being affected by the sun. So the aperture kind of closes a little bit. So you see that little bit of
right. No, that's
movement there.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
And you have the ability to use those mats of the characters so that the sun rays are coming around their heads, bending around their heads, and you're doing a light wrap. Is that what's going on?
That's right. That's right. I'll show you that right here. So this is the sun rays isolated. You see how the characters were cut out here, and how things kind of wrap around. And that's a separate element that I have full control over here. So I can full control over that element.
Yeah, that's great. That's actually one of my favorite frames, is when the lens responds to the light source of the sun at first, and you can see it bending around the edge of the dog, like a rim almost.
Mm-hmm.
I think we framed it earlier. It's a work in progress, and this is as far as we've gotten. So we've taken our audience through sort of a glimpse behind the scenes, and something that isn't fully finished, but illustrates hopefully some of the aspects of what Nelvana is experimenting with, and what might appear in more of our productions coming soon. And it's really founded in this notion of 2D designs with 3D environments, and the power of the freedom of the camera, and also the power of the composite using the extra information that's coming out of those 3D renders in terms of affecting the set imagery. Anyways, thank you, all of you out there, for watching. I want to thank Emanuel Rego and Scott Williamson for participating, and all of the other contributors to the piece that we've been demonstrating today. So stay tuned, and as we sign off, you'll see that movie in its not absolute full completion, because as Emanuel said, there's still things we want to add, but at the same time, at least you'll be able to see it play out nice and smooth. So signing off, but stay tuned for those 25 seconds of delight that you're about to see. Thanks, everybody.